Hi everyone and welcome. We're down here in my wormery and I'm about to feed some of my worm bins, but I wanted to kind of gather my thoughts and write down a list of things to do. But before I do that, before I clear this screen here, I figured I'd share this with you. This thing's been on here forever. You can see this thing is gathering dust, but this is a little drawing I made once of an idea of maybe some future time-lapse. So I'm depicting my little GoPro here or something to be the time-lapse camera, and then this would be a jar set up with different layers of compost and bedding and food and things for the worms, populated with worms, and have the whole thing sitting on like a lazy Susan driven by one of these old mechanical on-off daylight timers. So I'm gonna erase this, but I just figured it'd be funny to share one of my brainstorming ideas on how to maybe go about setting up one of my future time-lapse videos. This is a little bit of kind of an ambitious idea, so it'll probably never go anywhere, but it just seemed like an interesting, goofy way to, have the on-off timer ticking away slowly here, spinning around once every 24 hours, and in the process, causing this thing to spin around maybe every 2 or 3 days. It would complete one circle, giving you kind of an ever-changing view of the activity in this see-through glass worm bin. All right, let's give this thing a quick erase. So now, let's see, I've got 2 bins with the red wigglers that are pretty mature in age at this point. So today I'm going to not only feed, but I'm also going to set up the feeding as a horizontal migration. And that'll kind of set these 2 old bins into motion with kind of having the worms depopulate the current environment. Let's see, besides the 2 red wiggler worm bins, I've got the VermiBags with the nightcrawlers. There's 2 of those, 2 different types of VermiBags, and these guys I'm just going to feed them. And do I have anything else? Oh yeah, there's one other red wiggler bin, I almost forgot. Which is only a couple weeks old. It's never been fed before, and that would be its first feeding today. And actually my first chance at actually really checking in how things in that new bin are coming along too. So I did peek in there a couple days ago just to add some water, because it seemed maybe a little bit drier than I was comfortable with, but I didn't really poke around to see how things were going with the food that was placed in there when the bin was built, which was 12 days ago. Well, the bin was built long before the worms went in, but the worms went in 12 days ago, and my guess is that the food that was put in there was probably mostly gone, if not completely gone, so they'll get some food as well. So, five systems to feed. Let's get to work. Today's feeding is your basic leftover cantaloupe rinds, celery that's gone bad in the refrigerator, various soup, vegetables, etc., as well as the grit. My coffee. Coffee is over here, but this is one of the things that you don't really see me feeding very much with, is a whole bunch of very, very moldy rye bread. And I mean very moldy. I mean, that stuff is on there. So it's about a half a loaf of bread too, so quite a bit's got to go. So it'll be a generous feeding, and each bin's gonna get its share. We'll begin with the VermiBag Mini, where we have European nightcrawlers. Well, one thing that's different about this container, this bag, that makes it different from the rest of the stuff in my worm composting setup, is that this is a continuous flow-through system. So this system, when it comes time to harvest the finished castings, will be opened below. There's a hatch on the bottom. Out will come the completed finished worm castings, and the whole level will drop, and then you'll just continue adding compostable materials as time goes. In theory, all the worms will be near the surface, and the stuff at the bottom will be worm-free when you harvest it. So since that's the way it's supposed to work, and since eventually it's supposed to get pretty deep as well, I've really got to stop digging into this thing. I'm always digging down and checking out what's going on. So I think I'm going to allow myself a little bit of digging just at the top, maybe 2 or 3 inches, just to see how the last feeding's looking, but I'm not going to get into the habit anymore of going down deep to see how things are going on, because as of most recent check-ins, this thing's really been coming along nicely. What's at the bottom looks like it's almost finished castings, so I don't want to interfere with that anymore. I'm just going to let it continue on its own, and we're going to start feeding this thing only at the surface from now on. So let's see if we can get a little closer look here. Let's check out what's happening. Oops, let's see if that works. So remnants of previous feedings are visible here on the top surface with banana peels. You don't have to go very deep down just to start feeling mushy, damp stuff. Here you can see some of the grit that had been added during the previous feeding, eggshells. What I'm a little surprised at is, I see a worm cruising away right here, but I figured there'd be tons of worms if I start unearthing delicious morsels like that. Maybe I just haven't gone deep enough. Yep, go a little bit deeper. You can already see things are looking pretty good. So let's get these old pieces down where they were, down in that material. This also looks like it might still be coffee grounds. What's this? Here we've got a mango pit. All previous feedings. We'll take just one more little peek over here. Oh, got an apple that's not getting a great deal of attention, although over here I could see some worms hanging out. So all these previous feedings are gradually making progress, and we'll just have to make a little bit of room in here to add the next layer. I'm going to begin by dropping in a few slices of this moldy bread. Wow, look at that. It's about as moldy as bread I've ever seen. It's even kind of got weird colors. Not just green, but like yellows and stuff. So I hope the worms appreciate this. Everything I've seen always suggests that worms really love bread. And I've added bread to my bins a couple times here and there over the years. But usually the bread in this house does not last. It gets consumed before it could ever go bad. So in this particular case, there's just a little bit of a surplus of bread, and this batch of it just got really nasty. Must have been about a month ago. So all right, looks pretty gnarly. Now before we put the damp veggies in, we'll put in some carbon, a little bit of cardboard here, and we'll got some old cardboard or old paper here. Or you know what, we'll hang on to that. It's still in pretty good shape. We'll try to use that as a cover at the end, as we've been using. We'll keep using it until it gets more deteriorated. Just throw in some veggies. Some celery. It definitely went bad, was forgotten about. I'm not quite sure what that is. Maybe spinach? Don't know. This, I believe, is kohlrabi. Coming along like a nice generous feeding. We'll just give them a couple more things, a couple fragments of melon, and then we'll call it at that. It's a pretty generous feeding. So on top of that, we're going to still sprinkle a little bit of our coffee, and just for good measure, make sure there's adequate grit. We could get this thing covered up again here. I just happen to have a little bit more shredded paper here, so we'll just fill in some of these voids here to get a good kind of level surface. Alright, well, let's start covering up, and as long as we've got the spray bottle, why don't we give this top sheet of paper a little bit of dampness as well. Looks pretty cozy. All right. On to the VermiBag tote. African nightcrawlers inhabit the VermiBag tote. The bag we just fed the VermiBag Mini is inhabited by European nightcrawlers. These African nightcrawlers are a little bit bigger. than the worms I'm used to seeing. So one of my common responses when opening up this bin is always a little bit of surprise to see how large the worms are, because I always forget. But I guess this time it won't be much of a surprise since I started talking about it from the start. Another thing that's kind of cool about these worms is that they do like to cruise around on the top surface. So usually when you come in here to feed them, you're usually treated to a little welcoming party. You see worms cruising around the surface all over the place. And oh, is that two worms? Those two worms looked awfully kind of on top of each other, and they're not crowded, so I wonder if they were getting busy. Alright, let's see here. These African nightcrawlers are in a VermiBag. The last bag was a VermiBag, which is a continuous flow-through style. Now this VermiBag, though, the VermiBag tote, really replicates just a typical worm bin. And I guess the main advantage that it brings is that the fabric is ventilated versus, you know, most worm bins are, you know, plastic that doesn't breathe. So this doesn't have that hatch on the bottom, so when it comes time to harvest this bin or bag, it would be done in a way that's more like a typical worm bin. So chances are that'll be facilitated in a way that I'll do just a horizontal migration in here as well. I'll just move all the finished stuff to one side and then load up the opposite side with the fresh batch of bedding and food, so that they're attracted out of the finished compost and move into the new material. Definitely got some signs of the previous feedings in here, but I've got kitchen waste that needs to be disposed of. So even though there's plenty to go in here, plenty to go around for these worms in here as it is, since it doesn't smell bad, I'm going to go ahead and add more food. If it was getting a little bit funky, then I'd be a little concerned and maybe thinking that I don't want to do that, but the only thing I smell is this lime. It's got this really fresh smell to it. And I see worms all over throughout all of the different food types. So I'm perfectly satisfied that they're just going to continue eating what's already started breaking down, and whatever goes in now is going to be a supplement to that and hopefully ready for their consumption in the next couple weeks as well. So let's grab some more of this. Ooh, 3 slices. Okay. I was only going to drop in 2, but we'll see if we can make 3 fit. If they like it, it should go quick. I think they like it. So on top of that, kind of a similar setup, but I got carbon for this guy too. So why don't I drop in some of this as well. Got some more food to put in. That's an interesting carving style, going around and around like that. Here we have some cantaloupe melon rinds, a little bit of strawberry, as well as some of this rotting celery and whatnot. Good hearty feeding in a bin that probably doesn't even need any feeding. I don't mind. I usually push my bins pretty hard, so if you're a regular on my channel, you're probably not surprised. Although sometimes I even surprise myself. Material out on the edges seems pretty good. Alrighty. We'll start covering up with what was in here already. And then maybe we'll do what we did in the other one, is we'll supplement a little bit more paper. Oh, but you know what? Let's not forget to put in the coffee. For some reason I always skip over the coffee, and for that matter I often skip over the grit too. So I'm glad I remembered. One more time. Let's cover up. And let's supplement that paper with a little bit of fresh. So people that watch my channel might be thinking, man, he's adding a lot of carbon, a lot of bedding material, paper, and stuff like that. Because I guess it's in contrast to the way I normally do things. I usually don't have so much going on, but I don't know. Maybe that's just the gist I'm getting of some of the feedback in the comments on my videos, is people seeming to think that I'm maybe a little stingy on the bedding. So in the past few feedings, I've been trying to kind of put a little bit more of a focus on making sure that bedding is supplied in adequate amounts for these guys. And in most cases, that just means going a little bit above and beyond what I normally do in terms of adding bedding on top of the feedings. So things are looking pretty good in here. We'll mark the center over here as where the feeding zone was. And we'll just do the same here. Kind of give these lower levels of paper products a little bit of dampness, since the main purpose is to keep moisture down within the material. We don't want it to act as a sponge to start wicking the moisture out of the material. Kind of defeats the purpose. So, alright, some of these upper pieces don't need to be dampened, I think, just the ones that are closer down to the bottom. So, we're doing good. I like the way these African nightcrawlers are coming along. Now, on to the red wigglers. Okay. Now, this is the oldest of my red wiggler bins. We'll finish off with the newest of my bins, because I'm not even sure if that bin after 12 days even needs to be fed. So we'll peek in on it. We'll use this as an opportunity to check in on it briefly. But we might not feed, so we'll decide when we get there. Here we would have had a feeding down the middle, and we've got this feeding zone indicator showing that that's where that was. After we finish, we're going to have it on one or the other side now, because like I said, we're going to be initiating the horizontal migration in this bin. So what that really aims to do is lure the worms out of the finished compost into a freshly built space with fresh bedding and fresh food and everything like that. So I'm going to try to also include a whole bunch of existing bedding in that new horizontal migration space, and that'll consist of all of this stuff that was floating around on the top. So I think that's really good stuff. What really remains is the castings for the most part. So we'll put the new horizontal migration feeding zone over here on this edge, and then we'll begin backfilling it with bedding, and then we'll probably pile in some of this existing in progress bedding type material. So let's start peeling this back, make ourselves a little bit of room. What's this down here? I gotta be careful. There's a there's a piece of duct tape down here which covers a crack in the bin, and I always manage to get my finger under it and peel it off the bottom of the bin. I just go ahead and remove that. Just a little patch job. I'll have to decide whether it's worthwhile putting that back on. For now, it's gone. Alright. Got some really nice material over here. Really nice castings. Hardly any signs of any old bedding or any old food. It's just nice, dark, rich castings. Just the right moisture level. Not too muddy or clumpy. Nice and flaky, and I see worms throughout it, so they're obviously enjoying the consistency of it and the moisture level of it. Okay, so on the bottom we'll drop in some bedding materials such as cardboard and paper. And since that stuff is a bit dry, wouldn't hurt to give it a bit of moisture. Okay. And for this bin too, we've got one of these egg carton trays. Nice rich carbon food source slash bedding for them. They should appreciate that. And guess what? They're going to get bread too. Yep. Every bin's going to get some of this bread. Okay. Starting to run low on the cantaloupe. So we'll only leave one piece for them of that right there. Here we have the celery. And the kohlrabi. Alright, it's starting to look like a really tempting feeding zone. Now on top of this, I think we're going to start using some of this bedding type material, mostly cardboardish, leaves, things like that. It's been kind of kicked out to the top surface, so we scraped it all together in the hopes that what remains right beneath it is just fresh castings. And that should really make for a nice comfortable space for the worms to be in, since it's already partially broken down. Just try to do one more little skim off the top here. That pretty much covers everything in there. Now, again, I forgot to add coffee. Barely visible against the compost. They look so similar. And the other thing I like to include is the grit. Oops, well, that seems like a pretty generous amount too. So, don't breathe in that stuff. Don't breathe in the dust that comes off the crushed eggshells. So, down in here, I believe it's also a good worthwhile effort to maybe at some point in the future try to encourage the worms to exit the finished material by depopulating some of the old food bits that are down in there. So I'm sure if we picked around down through here, we would probably encounter certain incomplete food items, like for example this banana here. So I'm not sure how much of that there's in the material, and maybe in a future check-in we can here we go, a few more banana peels. Maybe we can kind of fish through there just to make sure all of that is out of there. And then we can really start thinking of that stuff as finished compost that the worms just need to exit out of. And it's not just like a place where they're going to want to stay because there's tons of food and everything. Although, you know, it could take time that they feel like they're completely comfortable in there and they don't have a good motivation to leave yet. So who knows, they might take a while to finish what they're doing on this side and work their way into the new side. So it's a start. I like the way that looks. Okay. Now, I guess a little change of pace. We usually mark the middle as where the feeding zone was. This time we're going to be marking the edge over here as the feeding zone. Not even taking a great deal of effort to cover up the feeding zone either. So just going to leave it like that. I think it should be fine. Alrighty. Let's do the same in the other red wiggler bin. Alrighty. So this bin is not as old as the bin that we just fed. But maybe it was just fed with more material over time, or maybe it started bigger or something, but it does seem to be a heavier bin than the one we just set the horizontal migration up in. It does feel like it comes up a little bit higher too. All the more reason to get this horizontal migration process started. You don't want to be like so full already that you can't really work in here anymore. So as you saw, when you push all this material over, obviously the level needs to rise. So we got to account for having a little bit of space in here to do this and not rob ourselves of the space to take the right next steps. Ooh. The middle is where the feeding had previously been, as it usually occurs in my newer bins, until I set up horizontal migrations, and that's why we're seeing all kinds of worms hanging out here on the surface. So the stuff I scraped off the top, I guess we'll add that to the new feeding zone, to the new horizontal migration feeding zone. And here too, if I poke down, I can already sense some remnants of the previous feedings. And it does seem like it might have been a good idea to fish all that out and move it over into the new feeding zone. But for now, I'm going to just leave it as part of the finished castings and let the worms work it through at their own pace. And then once it's been depleted, they can make their way into the new feeding zone. But heck, as long as we're pushing things aside, we might as well use the feeding zone as a place to do a little bit of pushing so we can get a glance at how things are looking underneath. So, as usual, the worms are going bananas, gobbling away the food. So we'll just keep moving stuff aside here. You could tell this material's a lot more moist, a lot more gooey and sticky. So hopefully now that it's going to be kind of left to wind down and depopulate, hopefully it'll dry off in time. It will. It always does. Yeah, you see how deep that is? Quite a bit of stuff in this bin. Oops. Looks like my glove just gave away. That's what happens when you're a human pitchfork. Alright, we're going to try to follow suit with what we did in the previous bin. Wondering if I might as well just use it all. If I remember correctly, we started with a couple of these different types of carbon type materials. Eggs have been on sale lately, so I've been eating a lot of eggs, which is great because I need the eggs for the shells as grit, but it's also good because I love eggs. And the third great thing is that I get all this great carbon to use in my bins. Now we're down to, let's see how much bread is left. Ugh, disgusting. You can see the spores, the mold spores flying off this stuff. Because right here, I'm already depleted the last of the bread, and I believe I've got enough room to put pretty much all of the remainder of this stuff in here. So I'm going to do just that. I'm going to decide now, even before we check that last bin, the newest bin that's only 12 days old. I'm going to assume that it's going to be good for a few days longer, and I'll save the feeding for another day. Not even sure what these things are. A variety of peelings. This is the last of the coral rob. Stuff has such an awesome smell when it's cooking. So delicious. What else do we have? Oh, okay, the last piece of melon too. Oh, there's two pieces. I thought there was only one. Cool. So these worms should be pretty excited about this new feeding zone over here. Quite a variety of delicious foods going on in here. The grit we're going to put in right on top of the food this time instead of forgetting to do it and having to put it at the very end. And then we can even use the coffee to cover up with like we normally do. Follow suit with the approach we usually use. And maybe a good cover for the feeding zone here would be the stuff that we scraped off the top. That would give it a good consistent appearance across the top as well. Some of this bedding type stuff that's scattered throughout here. Little chunks of cardboard and stuff. Alrighty. And this is a hefty bin. It's about time I started with putting this thing into its finishing off paces, because it is pretty much at capacity in terms of how much it can hold. This bin is pretty much full. Alright. Here again, I'm not going to worry too much about covering up this feeding zone. It's going to be just fine the way it is. We'll just put our feeding zone indicator over the top and that'll do just fine. Okay. But even though we're not going to feed it, let's check in on that newest of my bins. Wow, this bin is so light. It's always a surprise when you lift up a brand new bin at how light it is. I don't know if it's visible on the camera, but let's see, there's a whole bunch of these little itsy bitsy mites running around all over the place. And this was meant to be a place to mark the first feeding, a preemptive feeding zone indicator. But since it's not been fed yet other than the food that went in when it was originally built, I'm not laying down a feeding zone indicator. You can also see I've also taken my gloves off to resist the urge to go crazy picking around in here. Although I do want to see what's going on right down the middle, because that's where the food is. Actually, you know what? Now that I remember, the food was actually laid down throughout the whole bin. It should be pretty consistent no matter where you check. So what we'll do is we'll just dig down in one spot and we'll see what we see. I'll tell you, the thing that I'm noticing right off the bat is that the stuff looks pretty dry for sure. And I did come into this bin. That's the one thing I did do on this bin, other than what we're doing now. The only thing I've done in here is come in here with the spray bottle and add water. So I don't know where the worms are. I didn't even see one in there. There we go. There's a couple right there cruising around. Maybe that's where the food was. So it seems like they're getting by. They're doing okay, but I'm sure they'll appreciate a little bit of moisture going in here. So even though we're not going to feed, let's go ahead and let's put a little bit more water in here. So that's the one thing with new bins, especially in the dry days of winter time, very arid air, especially with the forced hot air going through the house, constantly pushing the air around, drying it. The worm bins tend to get a little bit affected by that. During the winter, sometimes adding moisture is necessary, so I'm going to go ahead and give this thing a little bit of moisture, and then we'll go ahead and cover up and leave it be. So, alright everyone, that's pretty much it for today. There's not much more to do here other than clean up, but I'll take care of that. That's not fun. I'll just take this quick moment before I sign off to say thank you. Thank you for watching. I appreciate your company. Always remember to give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. I really appreciate that. And also consider subscribing to the channel. That's always really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.